The night was cold, and the wind howled through the skeletal trees of Ridgefield, a small town in upstate New York. The year was 2028, and the United States found itself embroiled in a war unlike any before. What had started as a conflict overseas had slowly crept into American soil, with enemy forces landing in strategic locations along the East Coast. The government had declared martial law, and every able-bodied citizen was called to defend their homeland. Sergeant Daniel Carter had never thought he would fight a war on American ground. A veteran of 2 tours in the Middle East, he had returned home hoping to leave the battlefield behind. But when the invasion came, he had no choice but to pick up his rifle once more. Ridgefield was his town, and he would defend it with everything he had. Daniel stood atop a makeshift barricade, his rifle at the ready, scanning the horizon for signs of movement. Beside him stood Elena Ramirez, a former paramedic who had transformed into one of the fiercest fighters in the town's militia. They had fought side by side for weeks, witnessing the destruction of towns and the loss of friends. The enemy had already pushed through most of the eastern states, leaving Ridgefield as one of the last bastions of resistance. "How much longer do you think we can hold them off?" Elena asked, adjusting her grip on her rifle. Daniel exhaled sharply. "As long as we have to. Reinforcements are supposed to be coming, but until then, we hold the line." A sudden explosion shattered the silence, sending debris and dust into the air. The enemy had arrived. Swarms of soldiers in dark uniforms advanced through the town, their heavy boots crunching against the fallen leaves. Gunfire erupted as Ridgefield's defenders retaliated, taking cover behind abandoned cars and buildings. Daniel took careful aim and squeezed the trigger, dropping an enemy soldier. He moved quickly, signaling to his squad to spread out and flank the advancing troops. The battle raged on, with bullets whizzing past and explosions lighting up the darkened sky. Ridgefield had turned into a war zone, and the odds were stacked against them. Hours passed, and the defenders grew weary. Ammunition ran low, and casualties mounted. Daniel knew they couldn't hold out forever. He reached for his radio, hoping for good news. "Command, this is Ridgefield. We are under heavy fire. We need reinforcements now," he shouted over the chaos. Static crackled through the radio before a voice responded. "Hold on, Ridgefield. Support is on the way. ETA 15 minutes. 15 minutes felt like an eternity in battle. Daniel turned to his remaining fighters. "We just have to hold out a little longer." Elena nodded and fired another shot. "Then let's make every bullet count." The enemy, realizing the defenders were weakening, launched a final assault. They pushed forward relentlessly, forcing Daniel and his team back. The situation grew desperate. Then, just as all seemed lost, the distant roar of approaching helicopters filled the air. The cavalry had arrived. Military gunships rained fire upon the enemy, forcing them to retreat. Soldiers in armored vehicles poured into the town, reinforcing the weary defenders. The tide had turned. By dawn, Ridgefield still stood. The enemy had been driven back, but the cost was heavy. Daniel looked around at the ruins of his town, at the fallen comrades who had given their lives for this moment. He knew the war wasn't over, but for now they had won. Elena placed a hand on his shoulder. "We did it." Daniel nodded. "Yeah, but we have a long road ahead." The battle for America was far from over, but Ridgefield's defenders had shown that even in the darkest times, hope and courage could stand against the tide of war.